Network. This is Open Line.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Line. Glad you're with us tonight. It is Wednesday, May 20th, and we continue to talk, of course, about the coronavirus. Tonight, we are talking about how will it impact voting. Will it be safe to vote? Should Tennessee enact more absentee voting? That's certainly been an issue that has gotten a lot of national attention as states grapple with this issue. The president feels very strongly about this, as do Democrats and Republicans. And so we're going to talk about what is happening in Tennessee. And we don't just have the election coming up in November. We have a primary election as well coming up in August. So a lot to discuss and a fascinating topic, I believe. Happy to have with us Representative London Lamar, Democrat from Memphis, joining us via Zoom, as always, from her home. Thank you, Representative, for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me on the show. I'm really excited to be here.
All right, so what are your thoughts on where we're headed? Do you have concerns about how safe it will be to vote, and should Tennessee do something that it's not doing?
Absolutely. I think right now what we're experiencing with the coronavirus and its impact on the world is that this is one of the deadliest pandemics in modern history. We've seen more people die than many of the wars that we've been through as a country. And so people are scared. People's lives are at risk. And as we approach this upcoming election in August, with early voting starting in July, and we still see there are numbers of cases continuing to rise. People are steadily infected. People are continuing to die from this disease. I think it's important that we will have a strong conversation about how we need to reform our system in order to keep people safe. People's right to vote is their constitutional right, and they're going to exercise the right to vote. And in that process, we have an obligation as a government to make sure that people can do this as safely and efficiently. And the most efficient way to keep people safe as they exercise their right to vote this upcoming election is to institute universal absentee voting. That's the most effective way where people can stay at home and still be able to cast their votes.
So universal absentee voting, that would be mail-in ballots generally, right? Is that what you're talking about?
It's not the same as mail-in ballots. What mail-in ballots are where every citizen will get a ballot in the mail. And what universal absentee voting is that you can request a ballot. So you have the option of either requesting an absentee ballot to mail in your vote, or you can still vote in person if you choose.
And now, I understand that the state is already making some changes. They are anticipating that everyone over the age of 60 could ask for a mail-in ballot. Is that right? What changes? What changes are being done to accommodate the virus?
So right now, I've reviewed the plan by the Secretary of State, where they are putting in different options when it comes to, accommodations when it comes to voting in person, where poll workers will be able to use additional PPE supplies, where they will have social distancing standards in place to keep people distanced while they're exercising their right to vote. And while we appreciate the effort, and this is a very detailed plan about staggering out times and the PPE supplies that we provide in voters, the truth of the matter is it's still not enough. What we've seen in Wisconsin, what happened was during this pandemic, when they were requiring folks to vote in person, over 50 people were directly correlated to voting in person and being infected with the coronavirus. And so from my understanding, what we've seen already from other states trying to continue the in-person voting is that you cannot prevent people from contracting the coronavirus, regardless of how much PPE supplies we supply our poll workers and our election commissioners and those who decide to take part in the election. We must put in an option where people can stay at home, and that is the best forward. What we saw was that the election commissioner said that the fear of getting ill isn't the same as becoming ill. And what we do know is that yesterday, the federal judge in Texas struck that down and said the fear of catching coronavirus is in fact a good enough reason for you to implement options for people to be able to vote at home, which includes universal absentee. So again, I appreciate the effort, I appreciate the detail, and I'm not saying that the office doesn't want to keep people safe, but the best option is to implement universal absentee. And we, in fact, received $8 million from the Federal CARES Act in order to put in place other options when it comes to keeping individuals safe as they exercise their right to vote. And the best way to utilize those funds is to make sure those funds can be used for universal absentee voting.
So yes, you're right. The fear of contracting the coronavirus does not meet the medical criteria for voting by mail in Tennessee. But now the state is recommending preparations as though all 1.4 million registered voters who are 60 years and older will cast mail-in ballots. So the state is getting a lot more mail-in ballots than it normally would. It would normally, I guess, have about 80,000. Now they're going to have 1.4 million. If everyone over 60, so what do you think of that?
Well, look, I'm all support for making sure we're keeping our seniors safe, who are thought to be more vulnerable than the rest of the population. However, data shows that the coronavirus is not just dangerous for our seniors, it's dangerous from everybody. It does not discriminate based on age, race, sex, gender. Everyone is at risk of dying from the coronavirus, regardless of your age. And so while we appreciate the effort and we know that more seniors are going to utilize the option to absentee vote, we need to make sure that everybody can utilize the option of absentee voting. At this point, this pandemic is not like catching a common cold. It's not like, citizens can go vote and then if they get sick, go to Walgreens and get a Tylenol or some Theraflu and be okay in a couple of days. We've seen the hospitals get flowing with patients. We see a lack of ventilators because of the coronavirus, and we're going to fill those hospital beds up if in fact people have to go to the polls in person just to vote. Let's not do that. Let's be responsible on the front end. Let's be proactive on the front end and ensure that our citizens can stay safe by just being able to vote at home. It doesn't show that this particular option favors one political party over the other. It is a very nonpartisan push. This is something that's about people over anything. It's about making sure we keep all people safe. Furthermore, right now there are two groups already suing the state about universal absentee. And so if this gets taken up in court, we can see from Texas that this is a losing fight by not implementing universal absentee voting. It's in fact that I'm encouraging Governor Bill Lee to, by executive order and by law that's in the law that's saying in a state of emergency, he can put in an executive order that oversees any general law to go ahead and just put in a universal absentee voting. It's very simple. It's going to keep all people safe. It doesn't benefit one person over the other. What it does is making sure it lets the state know that we're being responsible and we're going to save the state money by not getting bogged down in lawsuits because of not implementing universal absentee voting.
You said it's not partisan, and yet it does seem to be often fought along party lines. President Trump has said that this type of voting, mail-in voting, can lead to voter fraud. The Republican-led GOP, or the GOP-led legislature this year rejected attempts to expand absentee voting amid the pandemic. And so what do you say to those who say this does lead potentially to more fraud and that it is a partisan effort?
I think like many of what President Trump says is just talking points not based on any type of scientific fact or data. In fact, the data shows that it doesn't favor one party over other. Even though I'm a Democrat pushing for this issue, it's not about me favoring the Democratic Party or anybody else. This is about people. This is about keeping people safe during one of the deadliest pandemics in modern history. It's unfortunate that I have to think about the responsibility of our citizens' lives over our president, or the fact that our president is stating that he will withhold federal funds from states who implement universal absentee voting. I think that's just absolutely ridiculous. What we need to do is stop thinking about political parties and think about the safety of people. Also think about what the precedence it will set. What message is it sending to citizens to know that in order for you to be able to exercise your constitutional right to vote, you have to risk getting sick from the coronavirus. And right now we have no vaccine. We have no additional data to see how this virus is going to impact people long term. We just need to be responsible, see through the fact that, if you're a Democrat or Republican, and see that it's about our citizens who we are elected to serve, and our obligation is to keep them safe by any means necessary.
The Secretary of State in Tennessee, Trey Hargett, who is Republican, has said that it would be a huge change to make at a very short notice for the state accustomed to in-person voting. Do you agree with that? I mean, it certainly would be a huge change. And do you think it's too much for the state to handle?
It's not too much for the state to handle. I mean, it's a change, but however, we're in a pandemic. Things are changing. We just have to learn how to adapt. We don't want to be behind the rest of the nation. Right now, our neighboring states of Georgia have implemented this policy. South Carolina has implemented this policy, which are ran by Republican governors. And so, although it may require just a little bit of work, I think our people's lives and their safety deserves just a little bit extra hours and a little bit more accommodation to keep them safe, from one of the deadliest diseases we've seen in modern history.
And so where we stand right now is, again, the state's ordering $1.4 million of these absentee ballots that would be available to people over 60 years old. You're saying you would like to see it go to everybody, be available to everyone, not just those over 60. There have been battles in other states. So you think this battle will continue? You don't feel like Tennessee has made its final decision here. Is that right?
Regardless of, what the Attorney General's opinion was, regardless of the fact that the governor supports it, you have two lawsuits right now going on. And what we've seen happen in Texas and other states is that if you continue and don't act responsibly now, you will get defeated in court. And so we can go ahead and be proactive and implement universal absentee voting and work with everyone to ensure that everybody exercises their right to vote. And again, this is not mail-in voting. This is universal absentee. There's a clear difference. You have the option. Not everyone will request an absentee ballot. So we can't say all 1.5 million registered voters will vote absentee. Many will still vote in person. However, if they want to take that risk, that is their choice. But for those of us who don't want to risk catching the coronavirus, we should be able to use this option instead of being able to force to go to the polls. It's just being responsible. That's what it's about. So
explain how that would work. We are talking about, and let's explain the difference. There's mail-in and then there's universal absentee. And so how would, if we were to get universal absentee, what does that mean? How would our election be different?
So what you would do is you will request an absentee ballot from your local election commission. They will give it to you in the mail. You will fill it out and you will mail it back in. That is universal absentee. Mail-in is when every registered voter gets a ballot in the mail and has to return it. That is the difference. You only get an absentee ballot if you request it. Otherwise, you go vote in person. So again, this is not saying that every 1.5 million registered voters in the state will actually decide to vote absentee. They still have the option to go vote in person. And a lot of people like to vote in person. I like to vote in person. I may end up, I probably will request an absentee ballot just to be safe, but there are a lot of people who just are going to risk it and go vote in person, or leaving work and is going to stop by the polling location and go cast their vote. However, a lot of us just don't want to take that risk, and we shouldn't have to. And so, and what the data shows is that since the state has reopened weeks ago, and all of these businesses and everything has all this PPE supplies, the number of cases still haven't significantly decreased. So again, the current standards we have aren't working. And so I think that we need to make sure that we're giving citizens options.
And that is interesting. So universal absentee ballots is what we're talking about in Tennessee, what you're advocating. And just so I'm clear, and so we lay everything out, it's different than mail-in voting. Currently, there is universal, well, currently there is absentee voting in Tennessee, but you have to meet some criteria, correct? You have to say...
Absolutely. You have to be over 60 or be ill based on a doctor's note.
And it's not currently accepted that the fear of being ill would allow you to get one of these ballots. You believe, in the midst of this pandemic, the fear of contracting the virus should be enough for you to be granted an absentee ballot, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, what about, and we're going to start taking calls, the concern about fraud? Is there a greater possibility for voter fraud with this type of voting, absentee ballot voting?
I think that there's the potential for fraud in anything when it comes to voting, when it comes to unemployment, the system, people are always trying to get over on the system. And there are mechanisms in place to ensure that the people voting or casting their ballots are who they say they are. I think it is impossible to prevent any type of fraud. That's why we have folks in place to make sure we're checking and to verify. So there's always a potential, but the potential is very, 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 very low. So again, I think that, saying that there's going to be this mass number of voter fraud is just a talking point in order not to put this particular issue in place, or not to, put in, the extra hours in order to make sure we can execute this process. It's just talking points. You can't prevent everything. That's just the way life is. But I think right now, keeping people's safety outweighs the thought that there's some type of voter fraud going on. And if we see there is more likely not voter fraud going on. That was the same excuse with the voter suppression bill that was passed last year that, again, got struck down in the courts because of the idea of voter fraud. I think that we oftentimes think that we use voter fraud as an excuse to push our own particular agendas. But the reality of the situation is most people are not trying to get over. Most people are just trying to execute their constitutional right to vote. And that's what we need to remember.
And you said the two lawsuits, I'm going to go to break after this, but there are two lawsuits, and you're hoping the lawsuits will prevail and it will allow universal absentee voting in Tennessee. How quickly are those lawsuits moving through? Do you anticipate that they will be settled before the August primary, or give us a little more detail about those lawsuits?
I am not sure of the status where they are in the court system, but what I'm hoping is that a judge takes it up before the election. And right now, what we've seen with the ruling in Texas, that there's precedence that the fear of getting ill is enough for us to implement universal absentee voting. And so I compliment the groups in Memphis, Up the Vote 901, and the Equity Alliance here in Nashville for deciding to create lawsuits around this. And I think that it gives us the option to make sure not only can we push this fight in the legislature, is what I'm doing, but we also can fight this fight in the courtroom. And that's where it really matters.
All right, we are going to take a break. If you are on the line, hold on. We have a bunch of calls. The number is right there at the bottom of the screen. There are a few lines open if you want to call in. It's 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back with your calls right after this.